to know the language of the day that it was written. The 18th century dictionary, what does pursuance mean?
To pursue.
Now we have words to pursue, to follow behind, but in the 18th century dictionary it says to make more perfect. So the only law that you can pass must make the Constitution more perfect, not take away from it.
Well, aren't they? Aren't they making the Constitution more perfect for them?
Yeah, that's a.
That's right.
Yep. That's what she means.
In this Constitution, the clause is interpreted to mean the federal law and federal authorities are supreme in all instances. This is, of course, the interpretation of the U.S. Supreme Court. They will tell you they're God. Don't challenge me. But the Constitution as ratified would require a quick look back at the voice of Jefferson. And I take you back to that. Let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted, recollect the Spirit manifested. The key phrase, in pursuance of. 18th century definition I read you. Let's look at the ratification conventions. And when the people stood before the people who had written this and said, okay, what does this mean? You said this. What does this mean to me? Just old common Joe out here, the guy who's been elected to this convention. What does it mean to me? Now, George Mason, who was the author of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is the first Declaration of Rights in recorded history, was made by George Mason in Virginia. And it was made before the Declaration of Independence.
What about the Magna Carta?
Well, that's really not a declaration of individual rights. That deals more with the country. And I would read from Mr. Mason. If the laws and constitution of the general government, as expressly said, be paramount to those of any state, are not those rights with which we were afraid to trust to our own citizens annulled and given up to a general government? If they are not given up, where are they secured? By implication, let these gentlemen show that they are secured in a plain, direct, unequivocal manner. If a check be necessary in our own state government, it is much more so in a government where our representatives are to be at a distance of 1,000 miles without any responsibility. Similar statements and interrogations occurred in other state ratification conventions, some of which I will read for you. The Supreme Legislature has only general powers, and the civil and domestic concerns of the people are regulated by the laws of their state. National government, republic. National government can operate on us as individuals. You can be arrested by the IRS. You can be arrested by BLM or National Park Service. You can be arrested by a federal agency. In a republic, that is unconstitutional. If you have committed some crime, your state authorities are supposed to take care of that, not the federal government. The state governments are absolutely necessary to our system. Their existence must form a leading principle in the most perfect constitution we could ever form. Guess who said that? Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton would call questions and attacks on the Supremacy Clause curious sophistry. And he said, again, quoting Hamilton, now he was really pressed on this Supremacy Clause in New York. They hammered him for 2 days. These are his answers. The laws of the United States are supreme as to all their proper constitutional objects. The laws of the states are supreme in the same way. These supreme laws may act on different objects without clashing, or they may operate on different parts of the same object with perfect harmony. The Constitution was framed upon upon truly Republican principles, and that as it is expressly designed, remember words mean something, expressly designed to provide for the common protection and the general welfare of the United States, it must be utterly repugnant to this Constitution to subvert the state governments or to oppress the people. It's repugnant to the Constitution to subvert state governments. Hamilton said it himself. He said, I maintain that the word supreme imports no more than this, that the Constitution and laws made in pursuance thereof, Hamilton said it himself, cannot be controlled or defeated by any other law. The acts of the United States, therefore, will be absolutely obligatory as to all the proper objects and powers of the central government. But the laws of Congress are restricted to a certain sphere. And when the Congress departs from this sphere, they are no longer supreme or binding on anyone. Congress varies away from the Constitution and passes a law. Those laws are void and not binding on anybody.
Could you say that quote again?
Okay.
When Congress...
Let me see. When the laws of Congress are restricted to a certain sphere, well, let me go back a little bit more. The acts of the United States, therefore, will be absolutely obligatory as to all the proper objects and powers of the general government. Now, in ellipsis, there's words left out. I'll skip over here to this. But the laws of Congress are restricted to a certain sphere. And when they depart from this sphere, they are no longer supreme or binding on anyone. That was at the New York Ratification Convention. And then let's jump to Federalist 33, which was penned by Mr. Hamilton. I will not, I presume, have escaped observation that this Constitution expressly confines this supremacy to laws made pursuant to our Constitution. Federalist 33. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Here's Mr. Madison. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects such as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which last the power of taxation will for the most part be connected. Remember that. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Madison, Federalist 45. The powers proposed to be lodged in the federal government are as little formidable to those reserved to the individual states as they are indispensably necessary to accomplish the purposes of the Union. That first clause is powerful. The powers proposed to be lodged in the federal government are as little formidable to those reserved to the individual states as they are indispensably necessary to accomplish the purposes of the Union. James Madison, Federalist 46. We've all heard of Noah Webster, right? Mm-hmm. His quote on the Supremacy Clause. You know that the powers of the Congress are defined to extend only to those matters which are in their nature and effects general. You know the Congress cannot meddle with the internal police of any state or abridge that state's sovereignty. And you know at the same time that in all general concerns, the laws of Congress must be supreme or they must be nothing. And that is true. On the elements that they're supposed to have, their powers are supreme. That's what the Supremacy Clause says. But when you venture outside the Constitution and create unconstitutional laws, they are null and void. It was stated over and over and over in the ratification conventions. Y'all heard of Noah Webster? Has anyone ever heard of Palisade Webster? He was a delegate to the Pennsylvania Convention, and he was a Federalist, which meant in those days he was a nationalist. They co-opted a name. They said, we're the Federalists. They were not the Federalists. They were the Nationalists. The Anti-Federalists were the Federalists. Palisade Webster, a Pennsylvania Federalist, had the most interesting defense of the Supremacy Clause. Writing as a citizen of Philadelphia in November 1787, 2 months after the Constitution had been proposed, Webster contended that critics like Brutus had no reason to fear the Constitution. Who was Brutus?
One of the authors of the Anti-Federalists.
Well, who was it?
I don't know.
Mason or Patrick Henry?
Robert Yates, the guy who left the convention and said, this is wrong. He was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state of New York. But here's what Palisade Webster, because Brutus, if you read Brutus, Brutus destroys the Constitution. This was a very learned man. Read all of his essays and you will really educate yourself very well. He said, Brutus has no reason to fear this Constitution because the new Constitution leaves all the 13 states complete republics, just as it found them, but all confederated under the direction and control of a federal head for certain defined national purposes only. It leaves all of the dignities, authorities, and internal police of each state in free, full, and perfect condition, unless when the national purposes make the control of them by the federal head or authority necessary to the general benefit. Anytime you see general in front of anything, you're looking at a socialist. These powers of control by the federal head or authority are defined in the new Constitution as minutely as may be in their principle. Now, interestingly, and those of you who have your little constitutions with you, you may want to look at Article 1, Section 10. In many of the ratification conventions, the founders said the Supremacy Clause only addressed the states when they were in violation of Article 1, Section 10. That if the states were not in violation of Article 1, Section 10, they had no authority. That's the only time the federal government could deal with a state. That's pretty limited. It is clear that the Supremacy Clause made the general government supreme only in regard to its defined powers. The states retained their sovereignty in regard to all powers not granted to the general government, and if the general government violated the Constitution, the states were meant to apply a check on the general government. Checks and balances. The states are supposed to keep the federal government in line. The federal government's not supposed to destroy the states. So until we understand this side is going to destroy us.
Well, and likewise, the federal government is supposed to check the states from
Yes.
creating laws or
That would be
rules that
unconstitutional to the
attack the
people.
other states
Yes.
or commerce.
Exactly. Of course, we had John Adams in the aforementioned Alien and Sedition Act. Now, Woodrow Wilson created almost the exact same act during World War I. George Bush did it during his administration. He just called it the Patriot Act.
Abraham Lincoln did it.
Oh, wait, blah, 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 blah. What are you doing? Wait till I cut loose on that character. Here is something that is just so critical. Listen to these words. This is what Thomas Jefferson said in response to John Adams passing the Alien in Congress, passing the Alien and Sedition laws, which said if you say anything bad about the government, we can put you in prison. You can't talk bad about us. Now, does that sound anything like Joseph Stalin or
How about Obama?
or any of those places? Yeah, Obama comes right in there too. But listen to these words. These words are critical. We have to commit these words to what we do. You don't have to commit them to memory, but you have to commit them to what you do. That the several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to a federal government, but that by a compact under the style and title of a Constitution for the United States and of amendments thereto, they constituted a general government for special purposes, delegated to that government certain definite powers, reserving each state to itself the residuary mass of right of their own self-government. And that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. That to this compact each state acceded as a state and is an integral part, its co-states forming as to itself the other party. That the government created by this compact was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of its own powers.
What are you reading from?
Kentucky Resolution. Since that would have made its discretion and not our Constitution the measure of its powers, but that, as in all other cases of compact among powers having no common judge, each party has an equal right to judge for itself, as well of infractions as of the mode and measure of redress. Now here comes James Madison, Bill Clinton of his era. His buddy Thomas Jefferson has just blasted the Alien and Sedition Acts. So James Madison did as all good politicians did. He got up one morning and went, oh, wind's blowing that way. So then Madison wrote that this assembly, now notice he's not quite as strong as Mr. Jefferson, that this assembly, talking about Congress, doth explicitly and peremptorily declare that it views the powers of the federal government, no, he's talking about the Virginia legislature, that it views the powers of the federal government as resulting from the compact to which the states are parties as limited by the plain sense and intention of the instrument constituting the compact. And they is no further valid than that they are authorized by the grants enumerated in that compact. Put one of those words down. That's one of those key words, enumerated. Make sure you know what it means. Front,
Plain
backwards,
sense.
sideways. Yes, exactly. And that in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right, and I love this, and are duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of evil. And for maintaining within their own respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them.
Yay!
Okay. Now, here's something. Yes, sir.
Are you saying that Madison, I mean, when he says duty to interpose, that quote kind of seems like he's saying the states have the duty to interpose over federal overreach. Is that what he's saying? Or
Amen.
Or he's saying,
That's precisely what
but
he's
he
saying.
kind of goes back and forth between defending national, you know.
Well, I told you, Bill Clinton of his era.
But he was on record here saying
He's on record saying this.
Right,
Now,
right, I see what you're saying. So
now-
he tested the wind,
Now,
and
he,
he went this way.
he lived longer than anybody else. So when they're all dead, he went back to his original position and said, states don't have any rights.
He changed
He
back
said that in
and
1823, I think, or 1833. Now, that's in here. Now, here's something that we have to hang our hats on, people. And I've listened to lots of people. I was asked at one time to be the Colorado head guy for the 10th Amendment Association, and I turned it down. I don't like groupthink. I'm an individual. And I don't believe they've really hit this thing like they should, but that's neither here nor